Are you leaving money on the table? Are you an accredited investor seeking new and exciting investment opportunities? Look no further than Integrated Investment Group, your trusted partner in financial success. At IIG, the focus is on delivering exclusive investment options tailored to your unique needs and goals. Contact them today and let their expert team guide you toward your financial aspirations. Wondering if you qualify as an accredited investor? Visit teachingtaxflow.com/IIG to find out and take the first step towards a brighter financial future. Integrated Investment Group, your path to financial success begins here. Securities offered through Cabin Securities. Member FINRA SIPC.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Teaching Tax Flow podcast. As I always like to poke fun at, or I should say demand maybe is a better word, or just highlight. We know you listen to every one of these shows dating back to number one. And yeah, we apologize for about the first 15 or so. They were pretty rough. Literally they were rough around the edges. Let's put it that way. But promise that this topic will not be rough around the edges. We're going to talk about these life cycles, or stages, if you will, of a business. So obviously, even if you buy a business, right? Like you go out and you purchase one that's been around for a while, you kind of come in fresh ideas. It may be in existence for a bit, but you may treat it a little bit like a startup. Every one of them is in a different stage of a business life cycle. So we're going to talk about it today. And, you know, I'll bring the hair on top of my head to the party, but Chris Picciurro will bring the brains for this part of conversation. Chris Picciurro, how's it going, buddy?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
You know, I have to say this, right? Because I think you're trying to make my blood pressure boil by letting all these people from Pittsburgh on the podcast. Not only are they from Pittsburgh, so if anybody's from Pittsburgh, totally fine, as long as you're not a Penguins fan. But unfortunately for me, Chris keeps finding these people and bringing them on the podcast. So I'm putting this out there into the ecosphere, whatever we want to call that. I am bound and determined to find the biggest University of Michigan fans that we have on our network, and I'm going to bring them on here and not tell Chris. So it'll happen. May take me.
Well, John, you might be surprised because you might bring someone on that's a closet Michigan State Spartan fan for all we know. Well, John, look, you know, first of all,
Ohio State.
Oh, the Ohio State. Well, at least we're keeping it in the Big Ten, right? Well, John, I would say this. You realize that almost everyone in Pittsburgh is a Steeler fan and probably a Penguin fan. You know, John, I know you don't flip through the newspaper to the sports section very often.
But I don't even know how to find it. I'm sure it's in there somewhere.
When you you usually get stuck in the funnies and then take your silly putty out and try to copy the little squares. Anyway, if you know what we're talking about, then you're old just like me. And on a serious note, we get a ton of questions in the Teaching Tax Flow community about businesses. And a lot of times we're answering these ad hoc questions. But ultimately, depending on what season your business is in, the answer from a professional tax advisor would change. So I'm thrilled that we have an amazing special guest this week. We're going to talk through what her advice would be for businesses in one of the three main stages of their life cycle. That's going to be startup, that's going to be growth, and then transition. We have Kelly Bender, again, from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and to John's chagrin, a Penguin and Steeler fan. And Kelly is the president of TBS, and she also has goes by the motto of life untaxed. She is an awesome wealth of knowledge. I had the pleasure of meeting her. I think at the end of 2022. She is very respected in our industry as a tax professional. As I said, she's an enrolled agent and also a prestigious presenter and instructor for the National Association of Tax Professionals. She presented at the Taxposium conference, which is what I call the Super Bowl for the National Association of Tax Professionals. And we're thrilled to have her here. And she's really an expert in helping closely held, because I don't really like to use the term small businesses, because a lot of these clients that we work with, Kelly, are not necessarily small. They're closely held. Well, welcome to the Teaching Tax Flow podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, exactly. I try not to say closely held, more like family owned, because more times than not, that's exactly what these small businesses are, is generally speaking, they're usually family owned in some way, shape, or form. And if you run a small business, you know that your family, like it or not, usually has to be involved in the process with you. So.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. There's very rare as an entrepreneur and anyone that is an entrepreneur. There's not much separation between church and state, really. When you own a business, you're always thinking about it. But tell us a little bit of a history. Obviously, we know that you're from the Steel City, and but tell us about how you found tax and accounting, and how you got to the point of being president of a really successful tax and accounting practice.
Thanks. Yeah. So I am born and raised from Pittsburgh. I love it here. And I guess I kind of sometimes call myself an accidental entrepreneur. I didn't actually think I'd be wanting to be self-employed because I'm an accountant by, education. However, the bug of entrepreneurship has been instilled in me since I was young and eventually just kept migrating into there's got to be a better way to build this thing. And early on, one of the things that kind of made me realize I was a little bit different than your average accountant is that, one, I don't wear a pocket protector, and two, I just always sort of had this nature for looking at things in like a really proactive nature and trying to help people stay ahead of the curve instead of always reacting. And so that's kind of been really my big change, is looking at things on a real proactive nature, trying to look ahead, trying to be better educated for people and teach mostly small businesses how to maneuver the lovely world of taxation. But also that really, adds in so many other things into their life cycle. So because taxes are just one part, they're obviously like this huge, big part of everybody's conversation, but they are also a byproduct of whether or not we're running a healthy, successful business. And that's kind of how I've focused on growing. And like I said, by accident or whatever, we've been very blessed to be able to do several acquisitions of other accounting firms because, as we know, our industry is continually consolidating. And in that, I've been really focused on acquiring other firms that also do continual, ongoing, proactive tax and accounting services. And so that's really kind of developed us into what I say is our, we're kind of the go-to place if you have a small business in Western PA.
Well, I think that definitely aligns with teaching tax flow. One of the 3 laws of teaching tax flow is that your tax return is a verb and not a noun. We need to look proactively. And I think what you offer to a family-owned business or closely held business is real-world experience. And like you just mentioned, you've been in that startup phase, you've been in that growth phase, and you and I both know, and in our industry, there's a lot of consolidation, there's a lack of transition planning. And when you're in that growth phase, it comes with different challenges, and not all growth is healthy growth. And then I'm sure you've worked with tons of clients and been involved with transactions personally on the clients in that transition phase. So what's your best advice for someone that you're speaking with or a group that you're speaking with? I know you do a lot of speaking. That's kind of in that first, let's say, 24 months of starting a business. And what are some of the best pieces of advice you'd like to give that type of person?
Yeah. So, this is basically what I usually refer to as that baby business stage. And so you have this new little person. And if any of you are parents, you can understand that they're trying to figure out the world. And a lot of times I caution brand new business owners that we always have to walk before we can run. And that's really what this first phase is for, small businesses. And like you said earlier, this doesn't necessarily mean that we are just starting a brand new startup from day one where we're, going out and having to figure out what it is we're even going to sell. But sometimes this is just that early part of owning a business, whether you've acquired it or started it from from scratch. This is that early learn to walk phase for a small business. So the big things that I always start with here, and this is why this extends beyond just tax, and I know that you guys have talked about this, is the first conversation we have to have is entity structure. And so before we can even talk tax, that's like way down the road, we have to figure out what is it that your personal goals are for this business. I ask very specifically to my new clients, what's your 1, 3, 5, 10, and absolute crazy hairy goal? Because those conversations give me a little bit of insight into, which path is probably best for that person. And so that's like the very first thing that we always talk about is proper entity selection. Make sure that you're properly protected from a legal perspective. And then really just getting those ducks in a row. So basic things here are going to include making sure that your bank accounts are actually properly titled in the name of the entity, making sure that you have operating documents and partnership agreements, or all of those kind of things that I've seen, because so many times people mess that up. And I know all of us have been in that situation where you get this person that comes to you, in year 6, and they're like, oh yeah, I do all this for my business. They never had any of this stuff done. So this is really that baby step foundation principle, stage of the small business where you got to get a good advisor who understands and listens to you. So many times, this is not the time to listen to the talking head on the internet, because your personal goals do matter here. And so if you tell me that you're just doing this for the next 2 years and then you're out, well, I'm going to choose something very differently than the person who's like, no, I'm starting a business that I will pass through generational wealth for the next 50 years. There's just not one size fits all. So it's so important that we talk about proper entity, proper structure and formation before we start running.
That's a great point. And I've just thought about something that I do ask people, prospective clients and clients, often what their goal is in the next 3 to 5 years is kind of my really focused window, especially with Tax Cuts and Jobs Act set to expire. But what I like that you just said is that you're asking for 1 year, 3 year, 10 years, and long term. Because also what it's telling you is if they even thought that far in advance, and maybe they haven't, which tells me that they're putting a lot of energy into just making sure their operations are functional right now. I know when I started my practice over 22 years ago, I couldn't think past maybe 3 to 4 years. That was a stretch for me because I was just in that survival mode, just trying to make sure that I've got things set up. What is, as far as entity formation, which is a great way to, great point to bring up. What do you see as the biggest mistake people make? Because I have a strong opinion on that one, but I'm very anxious to hear. I really don't know what your answer is going to be.
Okay. So I guess my big frustration with mistakes that people make that I think is, well-intentioned but ill-advised is often forming unnecessary partnerships. And so many times, particularly in marriages, we have, taxpayer and spouse come to the table and they're talking about this business endeavor. And I go to, we're a baby. And so do we need to create this massive conglomerate where we have, general partners, limited partners, mom's friends, nephews, uncle is involved with a 2%. Sometimes we just way overcomplicate this when a single member LLC would have been totally sufficient for you to be able to start selling something. And, again, because taxes and the reporting it gets complex as you add people, I just think sometimes, small business owners get way too far and they create all these multi-layered structures. And I mean, you probably see this particularly with real estate. We have, just all these ridiculous layers of LPs, GPs, and all these. And again, those have a place, but for the average person, just starting out and dipping their toes in the water, simple, it's what? Keep it simple, stupid. Simple is really better because you don't even know how to handle that. And so we need to just usually start simple. So I'm a very simple person. I like things to stay, simple until you've proven concept that this is something that's going to have a viability, beyond the first 6 months.
Yeah, that's, I think electing S Corp's a lot of people do that too early. And kind of like you're saying, unfortunately, there's a lot of people that start businesses and create all these entities, and their compliance costs are more than their sales the first year. It's like, oh man,
Yeah.
which dovetails into the next. So I love what you're saying on the startups, on the growth mode. So you're let's say you've got your feet under yourself. You might not have an employee yet, but you're at least supporting yourself or your family. You've got maybe a product that you have a market for. What are the things that you're looking for? And actually in your private practice, this is what happens with us. Sometimes a client will come to us in this growth phase, and they maybe have been working with someone, or maybe they've even been a DIY, goodness gracious, and they've outgrown that solution. And they're looking for some advice from their tax professional. So what are some of the things you're seeing that a lot of the growth companies could use as far as advice?
Yeah, so this is really that's that next phase, right? This is like adulthood. So we've grown up a little bit. Now we're figuring out, we've got our feet under us. And now we say, okay, I'm making usually enough money that it matters. And all money matters. And you know, not to negate, I love tiny baby businesses, but you know, it's a very different conversation for the person who's netting $5,000 a year than the person who's netting $50,000 a year. And so, you know, we've moved into now something that is more sustainable and looking like regular livelihood money. And so now we have a couple things that have to happen. One is, if you hadn't created a solid foundation, we have to go backwards, make sure that all of that's created. But really now is where we start to layer in personalized tax strategies. And again, all tax strategies that we give to our clients have to align with their personal goals. So you mentioned earlier, like electing S too early or electing S at all. I just had a conversation with a gentleman who heard, you know, he's going to do S, or thinks he is. He comes to me and says, that's what I want to do. I want to create a consulting business. I'm going to go S elect. And then he tells me, I'm only doing this for the next 18 months. You know, so again, it's like the long-term plan. And I explained to him what the cost of doing that versus the unwind versus just kind of going for it for 18 months, because he's literally 18 months from retirement. So those personal goals and tax strategies now start to matter. And each movement now has really strong impact into, you know, the person's personal life, because now we're paying taxes that are sizable and they matter. And so we really start to layer in, you know, tax strategies as you grow through this. And this is really that longest phase of the life cycle for most businesses, where, you know, you're implementing standard operating procedures, you're putting your structures in place, you have a little bit of room to breathe, you have a little bit of money to usually play with, in the sense of, hey, do I want to put it into my own retirement? Do I want to start to diversify my portfolio, because my main business that's, you know, my driver is earning so much money now, I can look at investing in real estate, doing a self-rental, things like that. So this is really that structure where this is that time that you need a strong partner, you know, to walk through, because each year as your business grows, hopefully, so does your strategies, and start to layer in what makes the most sense for you in the phase that you're in here, in this cycle.
And in the growth phase, I love what you said there. Is I just thinking out loud, a lot of times taxpayers have to give themselves a little grace and understand that sometimes you've got to go back and clean things up. You know, it could be an operating agreement. It could be, oh man, you see it, right? There's a little bit of cleanup in the back end that just has to happen so you can move forward, and that's okay. One of the things I want to ask you before we jump into the kind of that transition phase, and this is something specifically for small businesses or growth-minded businesses. At what point do you advise someone to outsource that bookkeeping and payroll function, right? Because sometimes they do it on their own, or their spouse does it, or their aunt or uncle does it. Yeah. What time does it make sense for them to consider outsourcing that? And that's a tough control thing for some people too.
It is. So, you know, this is interesting, because I always say, I actually, you know, obviously we do, this is like our undercurrent of our business is that we do outsourced bookkeeping and payroll and all of those good things. But I actually recommend in the baby phase that the most small business owners, the brand new entrepreneur, at least tries to do their own bookkeeping, even if you mess it up, because you have to start to understand at least the high level of how these numbers work. However, at the point where the amount of time and energy that you're spending, I'm a huge proponent of, we cannot multiply ourselves. And the only way we can multiply ourselves is by delegating things that is not where our primary brain power is used best. And so very frequently, after maybe the first 12 to 24 months of a new business, as they start to get a little bit of traction, the business owner says, hey, I'm spending 8 hours on a Saturday catching up on my whole week, and or worse, I'm not doing it for 3 months at a time, and now there's no ability to be proactive. So as soon as you start to feel like you're not giving it the time and attention to stay on top of it, is when I say it's time to let go of the reins. There are really good ways to keep controls on your books, but everybody has to come to that point. And obviously, I'm an accountant. I don't even do my own books anymore.
Yes,
you have to allow for the people that you surround yourself as you build a business, or you'll only be a solopreneur. And so, if you have any growth goals that involve other people, you have to learn how to give control up. It's one of the key focuses, and this is really when that.
It's basically the equivalent of you not cutting your own lawn or you not doing your own oil change. Some people actually like it, and if you do, great. But Kelly, we're both firm owners. I haven't touched our books in 10 years in payroll. In 10 years, unless year-end adjustments and that sort of stuff, but on a day-to-day, the bookkeeping function. So that is an amazing advice for that growth-minded entrepreneur or family-owned business. Now that third major phase, again, there are many phases in between these phases, but of transition. And unfortunately, sometimes transition happens unexpectedly and there is no plan. And that's what we really want to avoid. And then sometimes, there are challenges with multi-generational transitions, but there's a beauty and a pride. And I love working with families in multi-generational transitions of ownership. So can you tell us kind of first of all, when do you see most people that are looking to transition out of their business, are they typically approached by someone as an initiation point, or is it typically someone that's kind of done and they are looking to get out of the business? Obviously, when you're approached by someone, that's the better option, right? Because you're probably going to get a better factor or a better price. But what are you seeing there, and what are some of the advice you can give to someone that's maybe they're kind of afraid for that transition, meaning they're like, well, my books aren't perfect, or this, that, and the other thing, and I would tell people, hey, my books aren't perfect either, right? That's why we have month-end entries. But what are some of the things that those people should be thinking about in working with someone like yourself on?
Yeah. So, and you mentioned earlier, and that's why I talk so much about, the interplay between your mindset of running a business and the practicality of the function of all these things, particularly with the numbers and books and all that. But in my experience, the most successful transitions from whether it's, parent generation to child generation, or just, great sale, come from the business owner who has the humility to understand that if the business is something that they love and care for, and monetarily this will be beneficial to them, that it is better to exit with a plan than to exit by accident. And so usually the most proactive exit happens about 5 years, is where I think is a good sweet spot to start to think, okay, I am this age, or I've done this long. It's not always an age thing here either. I have a client now that is exiting after 15 years. This has just been a good, it's a heavy, intense type of business, and she's ready to exit. She is nowhere near retirement age, but the time is there for the exit of this particular business. And so usually 5 years before that, if you're starting to put in the headlights, I may want to make a plan, that's a good time to start to make sure, it's almost like going back to the beginning, that your foundation is set strong, that your financials are in a good shape. that your financials are telling the story that you want it to tell. And this is important if you're talking about valuations, when if you want to approach potential seller or a potential buyer, like, I have a great business, maybe this will fit into your business line. Well, I would like to present to them the strongest set of financials that I can. So sometimes that takes a year or two to make sure that you're not, taking some excessive positions on things, or that you've got, your payables and receivables in good line and they're cleaned up, and your internals, your inventory's clean, like all these different things that we know that doesn't happen overnight. And so it takes a little bit of time to get, to that. And then usually the average transition from, one generation to the next, the transaction is anywhere from as quick as maybe 3 months, which is super quick. I would say on average 9 to 18 months as far as negotiations, plans, transition, and all of that. And then lastly, if you're the average small business owner that I work with, the best tax outcome for these transitions is often by creating an installment sale type of transaction where we agree to seller finance, and that then ties you to another 5 years. And that, though, is the reason that's so positive, is that helps the tax situation for the exiting owner by, kicking that can down the road, giving a little bit of comfort level to them, but also setting up that next generation for success, which is what I love to sort of stand in the middle. I love when both parties walk away and they're like, I left on a high and I got the most money for my business and I'm taken care of. And the new generation is like, I got a great deal and I have a great seller that I, worked with, and they're set up for the next generation. And that's how we maintain the transition of generational businesses.
Now that's great advice. And I like that. I love thinking back, start thinking about it 5 years out. And, my final comment is this. It just hit me. Like, I think we've all been there driving down the expressway and our vehicle's almost out of gas, and our gas light goes on and it's now down to 5 miles, 3 miles. And you might be in the middle of nowhere and the next gas station's 6 miles away. And you're just, every quarter mile, you're just grabbing the steering wheel. And my point is, don't do that with your business. Don't hold on too long. It's nice when you roll in, you got about 20 miles to spare to the gas station, and you're not even worried you're going to be stuck on the side of the road. So,
yep.
Chris, I've maintained keep my mouth shut this entire show, but I feel like you were talking about Pittsburgh Penguin fans there. They just hold on.
Oh, goodness.
Fanship too long.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, yeah, I know that was
like a little dig at the end.
Well, Kelly, I mean, I figure you both would be really good at numbers, right? But Kelly, obviously you missed the boat, being that the Red Wings have won twice as many championships as the Penguins, but we'll leave that alone too. It's all good. We'll let it go. But I promise I'll save the rest of my comments for a later date. I'll refrain from them for and then they'll watch our team loses this year. Then I'll be really upset. But we should probably wrap this one up.
Sorry, John, wrap it up and say, Kelly, thank you so much. I know how much you have going on between your business and family and other passions. We are honored to have you, and I know we're going to be asking you back in the future we'll badger you again, and I'll make sure John doesn't harass you about hockey.
Good luck, sir. Good luck. Well, Kelly, thank you. Echo what Chris said. Thank you so much for joining us. I know this one we can absolutely have a much longer conversation on, so we'll definitely have you back for sure. And I promise I'll be nice. I'll try. But all right, everybody. Well, thank you again for joining us here on the Teaching Tax Flow podcast, as we like to wrap it up with. We'll see you back here again, same place, roughly the same time, completely but semi-related topic here on the show. Thanks for joining us.
The content provided is for educational purposes only. We encourage you to seek personalized investment advice from your financial professional. For all tax and legal advice, please consult your CPA or attorney. Investment advisory services are offered through Cabin Advisors, a registered investment advisor. Securities are offered through Cabin Securities, a registered broker-dealer.